luckily the introduction was in English, so I could actually understand what I'm doing here. My name is Krys. About 20 years ago, I started doing software development. Who's a software developer here? Who's doing operations? Who doesn't know what he's doing here? It's kind of where I am, because from doing software developer, Java, Perl, I moved to doing operations. And today, I'm writing code again. And I've been doing that for the better part of the past 2 decades. I work for a company called IDI. We're an open source consulting company. What we do is we help people delivering software with open source tools. Some people know me from the title of my blog, and I kind of tend to organize way too many conferences. Started doing our DevOps days back in 2009 together with Patrick, also organizing a config management camp, and there are still a couple of other things. So that's basically who I am. And that's why people ask me to come and talk about this topic. So, do I really need to explain you what this is? This is what DevOps is about. David Edwards, John Willis, DevOps Cafe, they were interviewing a large number of people who, for them, were doing DevOps. And that's how we ended up putting the CAMS keyword. What DevOps really is for me is basically it's a global movement which we started back in 2009 in Ghent to improve the quality of software delivery, leveraging open source tools. And that's still what it really is. It's not about tools. It's not about buying fancy new things. So, how did we get there? Because sadly, this still is today's state of the majority of enterprises. Software developers build something in their own silo. They ignore the rest of the world, and on a Friday evening at 5 p.m., right before they go live on national television, they say, here's a tarball, please deploy this. And nothing changed. And 10 minutes into operations, this happens. And nobody knows why. And that message is still exactly the same as almost 10 years ago when we started DevOps Days, when we figured out there's a problem and we had solutions on to solve that problem. We talked about collaboration, we talked about automation, we talked about new metrics and monitoring. And we talked about tooling. We talked about introducing Agile into organizations, about using Kanban for operations. We've been using startups as examples, but a lot of us came from large companies. Engineering companies, telco manufacturer, governments. And today we talk still about those topics. But we're frustrated with the fact that Agile isn't Agile anymore. I mean, a scaled Agile framework, that's definitely an Agile implementation, right? Except for the developers. It's good for the managers, but it doesn't work. And now we have enterprises as an example. Well, we have the one small silo within the large, huge bank who is actually achieving continuous delivery, but the rest of the organization hasn't adopted. And we end up talking about burnout, because people who try to introduce change into those organizations, they've been over-committing, they've been burning out. So that's the culture part. On the automation part, we've evolved too. 10 years ago, we were talking about CM Engine, about Puppets, about closed shell back then. We were talking about tools like how to use the cloud, how to actually use EC2. What about OpenStack? What about OpenNebula? What about Eucalyptus and those things? And these days, we don't talk about infrastructure as code anymore. We've all become YAML engineers. Who's the YAML engineer here? Who basically translated all those bash scripts into YAML? Yeah. But a lot of the topics stay the same. A lot of topics changed. We talked about virtualization 10 years ago, and today we talk about Docker. Who's tired of hearing Docker? Who's running Docker in production? Who's happy with it? It's always the same reaction. We had legacy tooling. We had new tooling. We have new ways of doing things. We have old ways of doing things. 10 years ago, we were talking about cluster. Apparently today, luckily, we're still talking about cluster instead. Not sure if it 10 years ago, but I remember filing bugs in cluster and basically having them closed on the new release. Luckily, that kind of stuff changed. But yeah, things have evolved. We talked about monitoring. We had bloated, ugly tools. We had slow tools. We had tools that didn't integrate. And now we have all of these. We used to have monitoring sucks because none of it worked. And now we have a lot of open source tools that actually help us to achieve better insights in our platforms. And part of that is because we've automated the hell out of it. We now deploy infrastructures and we add the monitoring automatically. It's not an afterthought anymore. It's not something which happened by accident. But the really hard part still is the culture. The majority of large enterprises basically goes in and buys the easy, cheap tool, and now they're doing DevOps. Or maybe not even the cheap tool. And it's only a small number of groups that realize that, hey, we need to change the way we work. So these days, nothing changed. Now basically I get a Docker container, and now it's an ops problem again. So, how do we end up there? I mean, there's a bunch of people out there, Bridget come out and a couple of them, who have this talk. Tools will not fix your broken culture, and they won't. And I've been trying to understand how this happened. In DevOps days, typically, we've got a global conference now where every city, every major city has about 150, 200, and then there's events like this who have similar kind of approaches. So the idea has gone global, but for some reason, the tooling really grows much faster. Who's been to an OpenStack conference? None of you. Oh, maybe one person. Were you using OpenStack back then? Okay. Typically when you ask that question, there's like 100 people who went and 5 who were using it. The same with Kubernetes. The number of people who go to these events, it's weird. When you start talking to them, I spoke at KubeConf last year, and the majority of people I was speaking to was like, are you using Kube in production? And all of them were looking into it. Or we have this great new tool, we're a VC-backed startup, and actually most of them we talk to don't exist anymore, or they've been acquired. So how did this happen? Why do we want to play with shiny new stuff? Is this because we have a really short attention span? Or is this because, well, our industry is broken and we've been doing resume building development and trying to add new tools to our resume which will get us that next gig, which will get us that next, maybe interesting job? Now, where does the real value lie? Somebody will spend half a year playing with a new tool and realize it's not the right one and then moves on. Or somebody who actually has spent a lot of time focusing on understanding how tools can really help an organization, has spent 7 or 8 years learning a tool, and now is capable of helping his peers using that tool and helping the business run. We see a lot of people adopt shiny new tool and then realize there's a huge challenge of actually putting that into production. This is Michael Ducci basically tweeting about, hey, it works on my machine. Now, how do I bring this to production? I got a whole different talk on this, but basically, well, you need the original thing, then you need a layer to orchestrate it, you need to deal with networking, you need to do upgrading, monitoring, supervision, you need to do config management on top again, you need to figure out how to discover service, you need to security, and before you know it, that small artifact you just got from a developer turns into a weeks and a months project, actually understanding how to use this. John Topper has a talk he gave at DevOps Days London last year, where he uses Mongo as an example to this problem. It works really nice. It used to be a really fancy tool that had schemaless data in there. And from going from using that tool on a developer's workstation up to using it in production, that's a whole different ballgame. And that partly was what DevOps was about. Let's try to get involved earlier into a discussion with developers, with managers, with marketing people, and figure out what they really wanted so that we can actually help them building what they needed. There's this thing where people want to do the bleeding edge thing. It's called bleeding for a reason. I mean, I don't like blood. But if it's really new stuff, it typically means that people have not used it in production yet. They have no way how to run it, how it's going to break, how to scale it, how to monitor it, how to measure it. And this is basically the shiny, nice demo compared to the actual product. So things have been getting more complex and complex. This is what Hello World looks today. If a new developer wants to build Hello World in a distributed environment, he's going to use a microservice architecture. He's going to build a service that's going to display something. He's going to build a service that's going to echo Hello World, and they're going to talk to each other. And he wants to do that because the Hello World string needs to be in storage somewhere. So he's going to use containers, and he's going to use Cube, and he needs persistent storage to do that. So at some point in time, we basically had a requirement if you wanted to do this on-prem, because not the whole world is in the cloud. You needed to have OpenStack with Cinder, and on top of that, you could do Cube with 1.6 Plus, which you could use Cinder for persistent storage, and then you could start your orchestration framework for Hello World. Because that was the minimal viable product they were trying to get through their pipeline to prove that they could actually deliver software on their cloud platform. Who thinks this is sane? Okay, some people think this is sane, luckily not that many. So back when I was doing talks in the early days about high availability, this was one of my mantras. It's still true. The more moving parts you have, the more moving parts that will fail. And we've been choosing and adopting tools because of hype. We've been choosing tools that really don't fit our business needs. It's not because Facebook uses it that it's good for your business. It could be. Or it's not because LinkedIn is using Kafka, because they're sending a zillion messages a second through their pipeline, that the tool you want to use to send 100 messages an hour should be the same. There's nothing wrong with the tool, but it's the use case. And then there's the difference in scale. We live in Europe. Most of you speak Italian. I don't. You have different legislation. If I build a tool for a business, chances that you're going to be using it are really small. If I build something in Belgium, my audience is about 11 million people. If I build something in Europe, complexity is not going to be the scaling of the platform, the complexity is going to be the scaling of the legislation, languages of, if I even jump across the aisle, having different currencies. It's a different ballgame. So, why do we want to do the same that people who have a completely different audience, who have a completely different scale, do? It's not the same. So, developers want to play with the fancy new tools, and the ops folks don't. Don't we? Well, we do. Because I've been playing with all the fancy tools. Because I want to understand how they break. And trust me, they do. I just don't want them to break at 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm not carrying a pager anymore. I luckily have a bunch of people that do that for me. But when they don't manage to figure out how to solve it, they still call me. Which still means that even though I'm not on call, I get woken up once or twice a year. So how do we fix that? I put the product owners on call, I put the developers on call, and I make sure that they understand why they need to think about resilience, why they need to think about those non-functional requirements and actually fix them. So this helps us actually adopting those tools. It helps us teaching other people what the impact of their decision is. But still, the ops are the bad guys. Because after 10 years of DevOps, we're not adopting. Well, we are, but the problem you're trying to fix is a different problem than the one we're trying to fix, and the one you just explained, we already fixed it. Or, that's a slightly different use case, that's not going to work. Or, well, you know, the proposal you just came up with, we tried that, and it won't work because this is going to fail, this is going to fail, this is going to fail, and let me show you together so we can actually make you understand that it is going to fail in these different ways. And also very often we say, yeah, cool, let's try this, let's build this, let's try to actually break this together. And then there's the other reaction popping in, well, we don't have time for that, we need to go live next week. And we've been doing it wrong also, the ops guys. I mean, one of my favorite examples is I was interviewing this guy for a Puppet project, and he knew all the ins and the outs of Puppet. He knew how types and resources worked, he knew exported resources and all those things. He could explain them. But he had no clue how to configure a vhost in Apache. He had no clue how SSL worked. He had 2 years of experience with a great tool, but he didn't understand what he was doing with the tool. And that's really painful. He was doing the tool for the tool and not in order to be able to support people that were his customers. We've also adopted in other ways. I could have printed a screenshot of our internal red mine with all the bugs we filed for Docker, because we were using Docker pretty early on. And it was not fun. It was basically pain. I mean, this tweet is not that long ago. It's all fun if you're just running it on your laptop, but there's no people connecting to your laptop, except for dedicating a server on the ISS, which is a laptop. But who's shipped his laptop into production? Who has laptops in his data center? And then there's the other reality. We don't have time. There's no money anymore. This actually is a really, really small project, and well, they just cannot afford it. There is existing technical debt. There is deadline which you weren't involved in. There's legislation which changes. And the reality is that most teams look like this. There's 100 developers writing code. There's 4 people in ops, and if you're lucky, you get 1 security guy. And the workload is the exact opposite. Those developers are typically working in teams of 7, maybe 10 people on one project, on one piece, one component. Maybe you have another side project where they're doing maintenance. And the ops and security folks, they're basically still managing and maintaining all of the work that those folks have been building over the past 2 decades. And they're busy building that new shiny Cube platform, or figuring out how to monitor Google Compute. So, senior ops folks start to look like me. They're grumpy. Well, we're not grumpy, we're experienced. We know how to break platforms. We've seen these. And we start making these kind of cartoons. This is the reality. We're double face palming all the time. The developers, they look at us, and they think we're pretty kids would say. Because we had books like The Buytaert Operator from Hell, edition 1, 2, 3, 4. So, there's this vision of people on what they think the other people are doing. And typically it's completely wrong. And once you start talking to each other, once you start actually collaborating, you'll realize that the perception of what other people do is going to change completely. So DevOps is the new cool thing, right? I mean, we've been talking about DevOps for a part of the past decade, and all the cool kids are doing it. All the fancy startups, all the high techs, they're doing it. And people want to be cool. Nobody wants to have a boring old job. Who's working in a bank here? 5, maybe 10 people. Why are banks not sexy? That's where the money is, right? So, those organizations start to adopt because they want to hire those engineers that actually have fun building things. There's a fear of missing out. They want to do something cool. That's why they start putting business critical system into architectures that they shouldn't be using. And that's why organizations like ours actually come up with stupid ideas like bimodel. Who knows what bimodel is? Who thinks it's a great idea? I mean, bimodel basically is the idea that you have 2 speeds, of fast-moving speeds, they call that playground, and the stable, good performing environment where your business is. The fundamental problem with this idea is that the whole idea of DevOps and continuous delivery is basically put in place to reduce risk. The fact that we do small increments and that we have full control and full automation actually makes our platform much more resilient than the stable one, which the bimodel folks propose, where you do the big upgrades once every 6 months. So those are the ones that are actually going to break, and doing continuous delivery is actually reducing your risk. So the whole idea of let's give the new old VPs and the old CIOs some cool keyword they can use by going bimodel is actually giving them the opposite goal of what they should be doing. They're reducing stability in their platforms. So everybody wants to be the DevOps, the cool thing, which means we end up with having, who's the DevOps engineer here? Come on, there must be more people whose company is completely fucked and hires DevOps engineers. Really, that's good. I mean, the number of people who actually are a DevOps engineer, I don't know, what are they? They're doing Java and deploy themselves, or are they actually writing YAML files and building stuff? Or the organizations that have built the DevOps team. I help a lot of companies going through their transition, and each time when you walk into them and you go to, hey, this is our DevOps team, it actually means they created a new silo. They created a silo somewhere in between the developers and the operations. They've introduced yet another handover. And it's a team that's going to take the blame. Or it's a team in charge of tooling. It's a team that does Puppet or Chef, or it's a team that set up the CI infrastructure. But it typically means they introduced a new team. They fail to understand that with a cross-functional team that is end-to-end responsible for the platform, you can achieve more than with more teams that fail to collaborate. And people adopt Docker and fail to understand it's a container and not a virtual machine. So yeah, I'd like to call them DevOps teams and DevOps engineers. And some folks in Russia managed to figure out, hey, we need to have a DevOps conference. So once again, tools will not fix that culture. The culture is really the important part. And somewhere, this is where the hype cycle is at. Where do you want to be? You don't want to be your IT department, which is still manually deploying servers with a CD-ROM. You don't want to be there. Do you want to be here? Like, hey, there's a new tool, let's do it. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And people choose tools depending on what kind of organization they are. If you're a Silicon Valley-based startup, you've got 2 options. Are you win big or you fail fast? And if winning big means finding customers that use your tool, you're probably not in the right business there. Because their business is not the customer, not the user. Their business is actually selling to venture capitalists. So it kind of doesn't matter if the tool they build is going to be resilient and it's going to scale and it's going to work for the next 5 years, because in 2 years, they should have exited. The difference in Europe is that we're building businesses. We look at customers, and we build organizations that are going to be around for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. So we need to talk about resilience, we need to talk about operability, we need to talk about feeling these things. We're not doing YOLO. We're actually figuring out how to build software that's sustainable. There is the other side of the spectrum, late adoption. We've been talking close to 20 years about the need for infrastructure as code, that ops folks should not go manually into a server patch and just change things randomly. And you got the people who say, hey, no, we don't need to do this. We're talking to them again 2 years later. So you really need to start thinking about it. You really need to start adopting these tools. Yeah, but it's too difficult. I looked at CM Engine, it's way too complex. I looked at Puppet, it's way too complex. I looked at Chef, it's way too complex. And now we're all YAML engineers. This one again. The ops folks are doing it wrong also. I mean, there was this time when I was consulting for a customer and Mitchell released another version of console. And we had it up and running in production before lunch. And the whole thing that manager back then was trying to do is trying to prove that he could do fast software delivery and basically going from ID to production in 4 hours. We actually did it. We had service discovery, we had good monitoring, and it kept working. Were we proud of it? Yeah, we were, because it was fun. But was this something that we would do every day? No. You do this with tools you trust, you do this with tools you have a good record, but you need to find a balance. You need to find the time between investigating how do these tools work, what's new, what can actually help us, where can we benefit from using and changing a tool that we know, to how do we improve the tools we have? How do we make sure that we actually completely understand them? How do we make sure that if we have this pattern which works for our PHP stack, how do we translate that to our Python stack? How do we translate that to our Java stack? And the truth is that most organizations are too small to manage 3 different stacks because the complexity comes with every single one of them. So we need to try to reduce these, but still keep an eye on what's happening out there. A lot of people dream. This looks like the job description of most DevOps engineers out there. This is what companies are hiring for. We need to know all of these. Who has knowledge of all of these? I see a couple of people like, yeah. I mean, this. Even scratch half of it. Who has knowledge of all of this? I'm trying to hire people here, you know? So people hire full stack engineers. Who's a full stack engineer? So you're doing kernel development and front end? Yes, okay. There's people in the room that actually do that. Sadly, there's not many of them. I mean, typically I'm the only one who can say that, hey, I touched the kernel and I've won HTML competitions. Okay, agreed. It was back in 1996, but still. But what a full stack engineer for most recruiters is, they know a bit of Mongo, they know Ember, Angular. That's about it. They've never even looked at that. And the people who've done the other parts, they're the ones who've been around in this industry for long enough to remember what OpenMosix is, to remember what Linux HA is, who've actually been debugging Java snap traces, and who've been performance tuning MySQL. We have an insight in what actually happens in the system and how TCP handshake works. That, to me, is a full stack engineer. And there's a really limited number of us out there. So, I think it's time for a new term. And actually, it's not just me. We came up with this idea at a conference in Bucharest last year, where I was talking to Mandy Walls and Ivo and a couple of other people. It was kind of a fun discussion. We were sitting in a swing at the conference venue, and I mispronounced full stack engineer. And about 10 minutes later, I got endorsed on LinkedIn by Ivo for being a dull stack engineer. And the whole thing on the swing, this is Michael Ducci's feed. Three months later in Berlin on a swing with his kids. So it catched on. People were realizing that we need to step back. We need to stop playing in production with all those fancy tools. We need to rethink what we have in production and spend time on understanding how to manage that and how to scale that and how to debug this. With as goal, helping our colleagues, helping the developers, helping the business. And yes, we'll figure out at some point there's a new fancy tool which is useful and which is going to benefit. But as a movement, I feel we've moved to, hey, there's a new version of Cube, let's put it in production. And hey, there's this new other fancy tool, let's start playing with it. And for a lot of people, that's what a DevOps engineer does. And he's forgotten about the real thing why we're out there. The real thing why we're out there is because people build software, and that software needs to get running. People need to be able to use it. It's about generating that value for the organization together. And typically, the question we forget to ask is, what value is that new shiny tool going to bring us? So, getting back to our roots, getting back to collaborating with our peers for a better platform, getting back to these original roots where open source was where we came from, where the innovation happened and not just adopting Slack because it's fancy. Getting back to empathy, understanding why a developer or why a product owner wants a certain thing in place, and trying to explain to them why ops folks care about stability, about operability. And in a lot of means, that means we have to get back to common sense, to basic understanding of collaborating for a better platform. And that's what the dull stack engineer should do. There is nothing wrong with using tools that are not released yesterday. It's probably better for your business if you do so.